Welcome back to this special discussion on the challenges and opportunities associated with investing on the African continent. Still with me in studio, I have Chris Paizis from Barclays, Keith Nichols from Thomson-Reuters, Claudia Furiel from South Africa's Department of Trade and Investment, and in Nairobi, Ali Khan Sachu from Rich Management. I want to pick up on a point that you raised a moment ago, Chris, just before the ad break, with regard to the role of technology, innovations. Africa has the opportunity basically to leapfrog certain normal sectors or milestones of economic growth by taking advantage of the level of innovation that is unfolding on the continent. And maybe we've got hubs in Kenya that we can make reference to with regard to such developments.
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about Kenya and people talk about East Africa in general, it is a hub of innovation. And that's why I wanted to make the point around the knowledge economy is, as we focus a lot on the commodities story and we focus a lot on the infrastructure to get the commodities around Africa or to keep the commodities in Africa, but we should be investing as well at the same time in the innovation piece. I mean, when we look at corporations investing in Kenya, as I mentioned, the age of the population benefits innovation. And it benefits investment in innovation. And Africa's, M-Pesa and other things, big innovations that come out of Africa for Africans that we can export to the rest of the world as part of this knowledge economy. And I think it's an important point because the conditions are so ripe for it in Africa.
Chris, maybe you can give us insights as to how ripe the conditions are, because you obviously intercede in some of these developments and have a bird's eye view as to what's unfolding on the continent.
I mean, I think Keith's point is a very important one, and I think is actually spot on. So one of the biggest benefits that Africa has is a youthful and actually quite well-educated population with a lot of drive to change things and get things done. And I mentioned earlier about something being bankable. Well, I can tell you that innovation is now becoming increasingly bankable. I think there's general acceptance that the old world economy has matured and is actually on the way down, if I can phrase it that way. So for Africa to try and follow a standard path of, we need to, build factories and make BMWs might not be the correct way. I think the points around infrastructure are still hugely important, but innovation is probably an advantage that Africa has, and M-Pesa has been used here as an example. It's a very commonly used example. It's not the only one that the continent can really benefit from.
Are we finding that foreign investors are wanting to play a role with regard to this knowledge economy that Chris referred to?
So the issue with foreign investors is that they don't have enough visibility of what's happening on the ground in Africa. So I think the onus is on us as African-based companies to actually deliver that knowledge and that vision to the rest of the world, which is something that hasn't happened very well in the past. I think, a lot of these things that have, come up across the continent have been relatively sheltered, and to Keith's point, have been there for the benefit of Africans, but there's no reason why we can't export these ideas and whatever technologies are actually developed in Africa. And again, I would say the onus for that is on the private sector to make it happen.
Which is exactly what we want. And Claudia, to get your insights as well, given estimates, I think by to the year 2050, Africa's population is expected to reach 2 billion. And as already mentioned by the panel, we've got a young population, people who are hungry and wanting to drive this change. Are we tapping into it well enough, or still restricting them and isolating them to certain boxes?
I don't think we're banking on it well enough. I'm not saying we're not banking on it at all, but I think there's a lot more we can still do. If you look, we've got 60% of arable land globally, young, dynamic, growing population, an abundance of raw materials, rapid urbanization, and I think there's a lot of opportunities that we have to maximize on that. And I think there's probably two critical opportunities that we have, and innovation basically plays a critical role, because that determines how competitive you are and for how long you can be that competitive. But it's about how do we ensure that using all these growth prospects that we have in Africa, that we are able to start untapping some of the areas that we haven't looked at before. If you start looking at trade in basic manufacturers in Africa, for example, basic metals and your plastics, there's a growing demand, a consumer demand for these basic manufacturers. And it's a lot less costly to produce them here than it would be then to import all of these inputs. And also looking at the services sector, it's something that we haven't looked at well enough. And there's a growing demand for reliable and credible services in Africa, and if we can use that if we can produce them ourselves, it will become more affordable for the population.
Ali, to bring you into this part of the conversation, obviously you're monitoring the young population, you're monitoring the fact that there is a lot of innovation unfolding, but also it's interesting that we also need to capitalize on what we naturally have, the 60% arable land that was referred to by the panel, as well as commodities rich. You've monitored the investment case for many a company. Are we actually sitting on the golden pot at the end of the rainbow here and not really understanding the opportunities that it can unleash?
That's a very interesting, many-sided question. If I can respond to it from a Kenyan perspective, obviously we've had this phenomenon of M-Pesa, the mobile money. McKinsey ranked us equivalent of France and Germany in what they called IGDP, which is the new economy, the internet component of GDP. So, it's been very exciting, and I think particularly for Kenya, it's given Kenya an added economic resilience to have this element of diversification, and I think that whole segment of the economy is set to bloom, and we're very close to that moment. Coming back to how we position ourselves in this 21st century, and going back to the knowledge economy, I think the mobile phone was a silver bullet. It is now mobile banking, it's mobile internet, it's an entrepreneurial toolkit. And I think it is really unlocking a lot of the entrepreneurialism which is in the DNA of our people. You can go anywhere in Africa, you'll find markets, you'll find prices being quoted, and this is really something that I think can be translated into uplifting our people because they understand markets in a very intuitive manner. So whilst there are some differences, I think Kenya is a good example of a degree of variety in an economy that gives it more resilience. And I think there's plenty to look at here and to pick up from. Regarding the youthful population, the point I would make there is this population is tapped into the 21st century via their mobile phone. Their expectations are entirely different to generations of Africans who went before them. They want it now. And I think if you consider that, it puts a lot of pressure on our policymakers, on our governments to start delivering, which is a whole new dynamic, I think, on the continent.
Chris, to come to you, is this the starting point then to help us overcome the unemployment issue on the continent?
I think it's a very good point. Whether it's the starting point, I'm not convinced. I think there are a lot of basics that we need to get right across Africa, and we've mentioned infrastructure a lot. I think for me that's probably the single most important thing that will actually help long-term unemployment, job creation, etc. But I do think the role of innovation and of intellectual property, being bred in Africa is a real possibility, and it's something that we should be investing in.
Skills retention and skills transfer, from your perspective, Keith, are we doing enough to cultivate it in Africa, keep it in Africa, and export it to the world?
You always can do more, right? I guess that's the thing. When you ask the question of are we doing enough, we can always do more. And that's what we're trying to do with things like our Conference of Trade in Africa next week, things that Thomson-Reuters is trying to build on the continent in terms of mobile innovation and things that we can do in that area. A lot of our internship programs are geared towards innovation and things of that nature. And so we can always do more, but I think it's a key aspect for the growth of Africa, and that skills development is a big piece. And globally, when my global corporation comes to me and says, "Can we do business in Africa?" and I said, "Absolutely," and they're like, "Can we do innovation in Africa?" Absolutely. So we're looking at doing a lot more things here.
We're happy that you're answering yes to the majority of those questions. Time now for questions that we're actually going to take from our audience. So we've reached that time of the discussion where we hand over to them and find out if they have any questions for our panelists. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're more than welcome to stand up. Please introduce yourselves and pose your question. We'll take questions in orders of 3. To the lady in the front, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Gugu, and thank you to the panel. Very informative and very exciting feedback from all of you. My name is Lillian Magaro. I'm in the financial services industry here in Johannesburg. I have 2 questions, the first one for Ali Khan specifically and the other for the panel in general. Last week, a leading report provided Nairobi again in the top 10 of most digitally enabled cities in the world, not just in Africa, but in the world. So the question for Ali Khan is, what is Kenya doing differently that the other major African cities could be doing to place ourselves in similar positions, because that enables trade and industry in a very, very powerful way? And my second question is, similarly, last year, third quarter, US President Barack Obama issued a major initiative in investment in Africa, $7 billion US. I'm curious and interested to know, what are we doing, and are we doing that effectively and efficiently to prepare ourselves for this tremendous opportunity that Africa has? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Lillian. We've got a question from the gentleman next to you.
Thanks, Gugu and the panel. My question is going to Claudia and Ali. Mielani Mkabela from Ansusa Management Group. There is consensus in the House or from the panel that prioritizing on strategy execution in the African continent, it's a priority, or it's a focus in the current leadership. So what can be done better with the different African leaders for us to see more of these special projects being executed in time based on their project Gantt chart? And my second question will be going to Ali, specifically to Ali. In terms of your analysis with regard to regional integration, what are the things that you see happening at Uganda and Kenya that are better, that probably at SADC we can do as well? Thanks.
Thank you so much. We'll leave it at those two questions. And Ali, it seems as though you were a firm favorite here in the hot seat. So let's pick up on the first question that we received from Lillian with regard to Nairobi being one of the top 10 digitally advanced countries globally. What is Kenya doing differently compared to its counterparts on the continent to be so digitally advanced?
I think the first thing Kenya did was bet big on the knowledge economy. We have put in tremendous IT infrastructure. I can get on the internet at phenomenal speeds for $50 a month, and I can carry that around with me. And you've got this very young population that's embraced that. If you went to Addis Ababa and you tried to send an email, it would take you 10 times longer than it would take you in Nairobi. And I think it's as basic in part as that. People are able to connect with the rest of the world at speed. There's a real commitment to drive that. And I think it is this embrace of the broadband economy that has created this sort of ecosystem in Nairobi, which is driving, I think, innovation. We haven't seen massive value creation. No one has come out and lobbed out an IT company for $500 million, but we're not far away. And I think that will be the maraschino cherry on the cake as evidence of this embrace of the knowledge economy. And I think it was that bet which was taken in the previous administration, which is really, really paying off. And I think that's what's attracting the big multinationals, where my other participant was speaking about, has brought Google, IBM, all to Nairobi, because they know they have a plug-and-play solution where they don't have that solution in many other places. And you've got a very hungry young population that are surfing this 21st century and have embraced it, and whose expectations are similar to what you'd find anywhere else in the world. And I think that was fundamentally the difference that I see here.
Ali, the other question from the gentleman that we also had in the audience was with regard to regional integration. What's working for Uganda, Kenya, and economies like Tanzania, for all of them to be on the same page with regard to developing the economies?
Well, first of all, they're not always on the same page. There are lots of situations where reforms are made which are then reversed by a single country. But I think what has happened is at the EAC, we have a very technocratic Secretary General, Dr. Richard Sesibera. And Sesibera has just taken a very technocratic approach, consistently put forward the technocratic agenda, and that technocratic agenda ultimately is in the interest of the community. And I think it's that sort of relentlessness around him, that a relentlessness about measuring, about informing the public, which has created this sort of momentum. And I think ultimately that's what's really driven it. But bear in mind also there is a convergence amongst our leaders that this is the right way to go. So it's working both from the top down and from the bottom up. And I think that's been a very positive mixture.
Thank you so much for that response there, Ali. To come back to Lillian's other question for the rest of the panelists, 7 billion rand, US dollars, excuse me, that Barack Obama has in the pipeline for the continent in general. Are we ready at the racing line in order to capitalize on this?
So if I can maybe comment on that as a start, I think what you have there is basically a reluctant marriage, right? Because the US themselves are a very conservative government in terms of their risk appetite. And African markets, unfortunately, we haven't done a fantastic job of demystifying the risks. Now, I can tell you, as Barclays Africa in 2013, we were involved in a transaction with the US government that helped actually finance a renewable energy program in South Africa. That was a landmark transaction. Now, is that happening across the continent? Discussions are there, but the execution is very slow. So my view is that there's work that needs to be done by both sides. I think, you know, the US needs to take more of an African view, and Africa needs to do its best to, as I said, demystify the risks in our markets.
Claudia, to come back to the other question the gentleman had for you was with regard to African leaders' execution of special projects. It's all good and well for us to sit at a table and talk and set deadlines, but how do we hold them accountable, and how do we ensure that they are held and upright to the decisions that are made with regard to whatever discussions are held with integration?
You know, I think the bottom line is that in order for anything to move or anything to happen, you need the highest level of political will. You need that kind of political will to unblock challenges. I mean, you're going to have countries with different levels of development, different capacities, resources, etc. So you need, as a starting point, the political will to be able to deliver on these projects. There's no lack of priority programs and initiatives that are designed to get Africa where it needs to be in terms of infrastructure development, industrialization, skills development, etc. I think it boils down to proper coordination at the level of the AUC and amongst member states in terms of prioritizing projects and actually ensuring that there's the leadership and the will to implement them.
Well, we've got one more question on the floor. If you could please stand up and introduce yourself, ma'am.
Hi, yes, I'm Lorraine. I'm from the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. Given that a continental integration is on the agenda, and we appear to all be of the opinion that regional infrastructure and industrialization, including the development of beneficiation capabilities, are what we need in order to grow the resources of Africa. But we also mentioned at the same time that the ability to execute on the ground is not always fast enough, or that it's not always visible enough for investors. So my question relates specifically to the question of skills, and in particular management accounting skills. Do we have enough of them on the ground to ensure that there's the necessary forward planning, costing, forecasting, as well as reporting, and that it's adequate enough to ensure we spend the money on the right things?
I think we will address that to Chris, who's our resident banker here, and Keith, maybe you can provide further insights. I'm not sure if there's another question on the floor that we'd be able to take in the meantime.
Paul Clark from Ashburton Investments. Just a quick question to Claudia. You're involved with a lot of the summits, and you've mentioned how a lot of these infrastructure projects need to be cross-border, and I agree. But how long do you think before we see a really big investment in infrastructure, regional, where national interests and regional interests can be married somehow? But how long is that away really on the continent, as you're involved in all those discussions? Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much for your question. Chris, let's come back to Lorraine's question, which obviously dealt with management accountants. Costing, forecasting?
So hopefully I've understood the question correctly, but I've got a view on this, and that is that it's no secret that African regulatory infrastructure is not the same as South Africa, right? So if you look at outside of South Africa, so that means that accounting and legal standards are not the same generally as we would experience in the South African market, which is one of the most advanced in the world. Now, what I would say to that is that we need to get out of the mindset that we will have a gold standard in every market that we deal with.
Why wouldn't that work?
Well, it takes some time to get there, right? So in South Africa, we're very fortunate in that we've had a really good legal and accounting infrastructure for a very long time. Now, in new markets, and I mean, African markets are often called frontier markets, this is still developing. And in order to develop, it means that you need more transactions, more investment, and then you will find that infrastructure developing. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. And my comment to that is, African markets are very high growth compared to the rest of the world. The opportunities are there to invest, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get the same perceived safety of a legal and accounting infrastructure that you would in Europe or even South Africa.
Claudia, to come back to you with regard, Keith, you wanted to add something there. Apologies.
No, I did. I think most people on the continent know Thomson-Reuters from our financials news and information piece, but globally, we're very well known in the accounting space, as well as the tax space, as well as the legal space. And so this is something that I look at very carefully. And I think I've actually read some of your statistics on the shortage of management and accountants on the continent. And it is a big deal. And for me, it's a big deal because I want to be able to empower the management accountants on the continent to do their jobs better. We as Thomson-Reuters, you know, when I go back to my original point of how to enable success on the continent, it is increasing access to the rule of law. It is increasing transparency around regulations. It's getting more people, to your point about skills development, more people in the accounting profession, because those are the professions that are going to drive investment in the continent. And no, we don't have enough, and we need to invest in that here in South Africa as well as in the rest of Africa.
Thanks so much for that, Keith. Claudia, to come back to you, look into your crystal ball and tell us how long can we expect those infrastructural plans and projects to be put in place, as Paul asked?
Well, you know, we've got the broader continental program for infrastructure development, which looks at 51 key priority projects. So they're all at different levels of, or different stages of implementation. Some in pre-feasibility, some feasibility, and some already in terms of execution. You'll look at, through the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative, for example, the gas pipeline between Nigeria and Algeria is already making huge progress. Then you look at regional levels. You'll have the regional infrastructure master plans of each regional economic community. So they'll come up with more definite specific projects that speak to the broader continental program. And then you've got your national programs. And as South Africa, our infrastructure projects and plans have the regional element as well. It's not just about improving the infrastructure in South Africa, but how do we ensure that that connects us to especially our neighboring countries. So there are some projects that will take longer to implement. I mean, there's projects that are in the pipeline for the next 20 years, and there's projects that are expected to be visible in the next 5 years. So depending on the project, that will depend on the time frame, but I think definitely in the next 5 years you'll see a vast difference. And if you start looking at some of the African cities in the continent, you'll see incredible infrastructure development already taking place. The idea now is to ensure that that infrastructure connects all the economies regionally as well.
So it might take a little bit of time, but one thing's for sure is that the continent is on the cusp of a breakthrough. Well, for more information on investing in Africa, make sure that you don't miss the annual Trading Africa Summit next week, which will be held in Cape Town. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this CNBC Africa special debate. Thanks once more to our distinguished guests, Chris Paizis from Barclays, Keith Nichols from Thomson-Reuters, Claudia Furiel from South Africa's Department of Trade and Industry, and in our Nairobi bureau, technically connected, Ali Khan Sachu from Rich Management. And of course, a huge thank you to our audience for participating and taking part. Until next time, it's goodbye, everyone.